how driven for connection with other people we are. So she was telling me that some of her friends are doing this thing, this is a teenage client, where they drive into a parking lot and all sit in their cars and like point their cars towards each other and talk on their phones to each other. And just like look at each other and talk at each other on their phones. And this is something that like, it makes me want to cry talking about it, but like, I can just imagine in the future thinking about like images of this kind of thing happening. And just thinking about like all the ways in which people kind of find solutions around different things. I have another client who was telling me that like one of her 16th birthday is going to come up, and her mom is thinking about ways to like think about making this 16th birthday party special for her because she can't have a birthday party. And she's going to mail her friends little like cupcake making kits that they can each make at their house, and then have a Zoom party where they make cupcakes together. And I mean, even though there's a lot of sadness and loss in each of these little stories about opportunities that are missed for connection, there's also so much beauty, I think, as well, in terms of how the lengths that people go to try to sustain the connections they have with other people. And of course, there are like hundreds and thousands of stories like this. I've just been, I think this week, feeling grateful that we're motivated to stay connected to one another.
Thanks, Jessie.
Yeah.
That was inspiring. And I too have been inspired by my colleagues at UCI. We have been furiously planning to try and provide the best care we can for our patients under very different circumstances. So in many cases, this means helping them stay out of the hospital or the clinic. So we switched over to Zoom visits this week. And it wasn't entirely smooth, but it's gone a lot more quickly than we would have imagined. And I think I've been inspired by seeing all of my colleagues, from anesthesia in the ICU to our residents in family medicine and the medical students, all stepping up to say, what can we do? How can we help? How can we do the best job we can to prepare for what might be coming so that we can do the best care for our patients? So it's really been very inspiring for me to see how quickly and well people have adapted. It hasn't been easy. It's been very stressful, but people want to make a difference. They want to make a contribution, not just in the health system, but really in the neighborhood. I see that in our community as well. So it's inspiring.
Absolutely. So let's start, Jessie, with you and with the questions that we have. And I will then share these questions after we go through them later in a Google Doc. We'll save the chat, and I will then send those to the people who are on the chat. So the first question is this is so present for me as well. How do I know whether my neighbors and friends are emotionally, mentally okay? What things can I or should I observe? What therapist skills, in quotes, can I use to check on people without saying, are you extra depressed?
Susan, is it okay if I share my screen?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay. So Susan gave me some of these questions ahead of time, so I just made a little visual aid to, oh, you know what? It says that the host disabled screen sharing. Do you know how to disable it?
Now you should be able.
Okay, cool.
Thanks, McKinley.
Let me, okay. Can you guys see my screen?
That's great, yes.
Okay, yeah.
Okay, so this is the question here. Okay. So this is the first part of the question. I kind of divided it into two parts of the question. So I think this is a great question. I think one of the things that makes this really hard is that we're really socially distanced from people, you know, if we're doing this well. So we don't have a lot of information about how other people are doing. We might have a lot of information about how people in our direct families are doing, maybe too much information about how people in our families are doing, but not a lot of information about how other people in our community are doing. Okay, let me see, it's not going to this. Okay, let me see if there's a way for me to minimize this. Okay, there we go. So these are some things that I was thinking would be kind of signs of distress. And, you know, I'm trying to think about what you might be able to see in kind of passing interactions that you might have with neighbors, or in conversations that you're having over the phone or over Zoom with people, or in interactions with people at the grocery store, or things like that. The kind of classic signs that we see when we think about mental health problems or signs of distress are hostility, irritability, aggression. That's outside the norm. So someone, you know, yelling at somebody or behaving in a really aggressive way. A lot of fear or paranoia. And again, you have to kind of weigh this in terms of what's appropriate for the situation. It makes sense that people have a lot of concern, but I think something that seems really far outside the norm. So someone who is not leaving their house to get groceries, for example, or is not accepting any packages at all, won't allow things to come into their house. If you become aware of like someone who's engaging in rituals, behaviors that are taking hours and hours and hours before they let a package get into their house, that kind of thing that seems like it's really exceeding the norm of what you would expect. Social withdrawal that's, again, outside the norm of what people are recommending. So goes far beyond what people are saying is appropriate for social distancing. So someone who won't stand, you know, 30 feet apart from someone would be like something that would be worrying. This is a sign that would be worrying in terms of depression-related risks. So someone who's showing signs of like hopelessness or loss of interest or pleasure in things that used to bring them pleasure. So someone who says something like, you know, nothing is making me feel good anymore. I just don't have any motivation to engage in anything at all. I think probably substance misuse is something that is really risky right now because there's not a lot that people can do to bring them pleasure. But substances, especially for adults, are pretty readily available. So someone who's taking in a lot of substances, that's something else that I would watch for a lot. And then a failure to be doing what people need to be doing. And again, that's not accounted for by, for example, having to homeschool your children or something like that. Okay, and kids, the signs I think are pretty similar, except you have to think about them as in terms of what they would look like in terms of children based on their developmental stage. So kids who are fighting a lot with their siblings, maybe way more so than you would expect, given that they're all confined in the same space. Kids who are looking really irritable. Kids who are unable to sleep or having lots and lots of nightmares at night because they're so worried about coronavirus. Kids who are staying in their room all the time and don't want to come out or don't want to play with other kids. Teenagers who don't want to have any kind of contact with their peers are talking about not wanting to go back to school. I have a number of clients who are talking about that already, teenage clients who are anticipating not wanting to go back to school when it comes up again, having, conflicts, a lot of conflicts with their siblings or peers. And again, the same loss of interest or pleasure, that one's a risk for depression, substance use, and then not completing their schoolwork. Okay, the second part of this question was what therapist skills can they use? And this, I would like to think of them as people skills or human skills, but yeah, therapist skills. So I think the first way to kind of approach this type of thing would be to normalize distress, because one of the risks if you're trying to say like, are you doing okay, is that you right off the bat, if someone is feeling, if there's stigma around feeling distressed or they're shaming themselves for not doing okay, you can kind of get rid of that right off the bat by saying something like, of course you're having a hard time. This is an incredibly hard time right now. Everybody's struggling. This situation is making all of us really struggle. We're all having a lot of distress. So making statements that are indicative that it is totally, totally expected that this is a hard time. The second thing I would do is express empathy for that distress. So state that you care about how that person is feeling. I'm really sorry that you're struggling. I wish this weren't so hard for you. The third thing that I would do is offer to help in really concrete ways. Saying something like, can I help? Or let me know if I can help is usually not helpful to people. It's really hard for people to ask for help, and it becomes much harder to ask for help when people are struggling. So it's a much, much smarter, better strategy to say, can I do this for you? Can I do this for you? Or can I do this for you? So to offer to help in 3 or more concrete ways. I wouldn't offer to help in 10 ways, but I would offer to help in maybe 3 ways. And if you give people 3 different options about how about if I do this for you, or how about if I do this for you, or how about if I do this for you, and then they can say yes or no to those options. And you have to think creatively about how you could help, because it's actually quite hard to be helpful right now, given all the restrictions that are in place. I listed kind of a few different ways right here, but depending on what you think might be hard for this person, or what might be helpful to them, you can try to think creatively about ways you could help. And then I think following up and following through with whatever you've offered is really important. Checking on if you were able to help for them, like, was what you did helpful, in fact? And if it was, then try to repeat it. Or if what you did was not actually helpful, then try something different. What would be helpful for them? Okay, that was that question, Susan.
That was great. Well, you've got these here. How should I manage my child's time during this extended quarantine? How do I balance my child's needs for independence and structure? And how does this change with age overall?
Oh, this is such a hard question. I feel like the rest of the questions are all about parenting, and how to be a parent during this time is so hard, because the challenges of parenting have the whole parenting landscape has changed. Like being a parent right now is just a totally different, this is a game changer. So I'd say my recommendations for structure are generally, I think that it really helps to have a daily schedule for kids right now. I wouldn't say it helps to have a really rigid schedule, so not a schedule on the order of like this hour we're doing this, or these 10 minutes we're doing this, but roughly like this is the time we roughly wake up, and this is the time we have breakfast, in the morning we do this, and in the afternoon we do this, or kind of whatever works for your family, but having some kind of sense about this is kind of what our daily rhythm is like. I think that's actually really helpful for children, and it's probably helpful for you too. But in terms of what's going to help your kids, and in terms of what's going to create predictability for them, I think what kids are really lacking right now is predictability, routine, rhythm, and a sense of normalcy. And that's, I think, incredibly helpful for them. In terms of increasing their psychological sense of safety, which I would argue is probably sorely lacking for all of us, and especially for kids, structure is really important. I also think marking time for kids on a daily or weekly or monthly calendar can be really important, just so they know, like, this is the time that's been marching on, this is the day we're on. It's really easy for kids to lose track of like what day it is, since all the days feel the same. And so for them to know this is how much time we've passed through, just so they feel kind of a sense of accomplishment, that it's not that no time has passed. I think the degree of scheduling that you need to do for your kids should lower as your kids get older, and you can involve your kids, and probably should involve them as they get older. So junior high school kids and high schoolers should help make up their own schedule for what the day should be like. What should, you could ask them, what do you think your schedule should be like? What would be a helpful schedule for you to maintain? One thing I would really recommend is trying as much as possible to help keep your kids' sleep cycle on track. I've noticed that a lot of teenagers in particular are really off in their sleep cycles, so that meaning that they're going to bed really late and waking up really late. And that's what happens to teenagers during the summer as well. And that's just not, it's not super ideal. I think getting a little bit off in terms of sleep, like going to bed a little bit later, in terms of, when I say a little bit, like an hour or two later, and waking up an hour or two later is not the worst thing, but getting super off is not great for them. I think building in exercise to their schedule is really good, especially since, you know, they're getting less out and about time, and you can build in new kind of elements to your schedule. I'm sure a lot of families are already doing this. So like family exercise is great. One of the elements of this schedule was, or this question was, how do you balance a child's need for independence? I think that, and this is also, you know, based on the child developmental level, but I think one idea would be that the parent, if your kid's younger, the parent could make the schedule or decide this is what the schedule should be, but you could build in flexibility into the schedule. So the parent decides this is your reading time or this is your academic time, but then the child gets to choose within that. So that, you know, the parent decides this is the reading time, but the child chooses the book, for example. Okay, this is the next question, Susan.
The public schools want my children to do everything online, improve their time working. How do I balance these demands with the almost universal advice to limit screen time? That's a great question.
Yeah, this is a great question. And I feel like in answering this question, I wanted to take this approach of just completely stepping back for a second. And I hope that's okay with whoever asked this question, because I think that when I kind of saw this question, I was just thinking again about how much of a parenting challenge this whole situation poses, and how I think that it's almost impossible to just answer this question as it is. And I think that's the way for so many questions about parenting right now. So I wanted to step back a bit. I feel like this is really a time like really we've never really experienced before. So I think that almost it's important to think about, okay, what are your parenting values and goals during this time? And then how do you wish to go about accomplishing those goals? Because, and this is, you know, this is kind of what I would recommend anyway, as a parent, that you have parenting values and goals, and you think about how do you want to achieve those parenting values and goals. But right now it has to be different because we're so limited. We're not operating with the rules are not the same right now. And we've got to kind of, you know, change course. So I think we have to just kind of be ready to do that. And I think that the normal rules that we might have around technology or time outside or bedtime or limit setting or any of these things that we normally have rules about, I think we have to be prepared to be flexible around those. So I thought I would do this task myself for you guys, since I don't know any of you, and I didn't know who asked the question. So I thought I would just give you an example about, and everyone's parenting values would be different, right? If I asked you to do this, everyone's would be different, and everyone's way of implementing this would be different. But just to kind of think through this together, if I were to say, okay, what are my parenting values during this time? It would look something like this. My values as a parent would be, okay, I want to keep my children, my family, and my community physically safe and healthy. That's probably my number. These are probably ordered in terms of priority. Number 2 would be, I want to keep my children feeling psychologically safe and in good spirits. And then I want to help them continue to thrive in various different ways. That one for me is less important than the other ones. But it may not be less important for different people, but for me right now, that's less important. So then I think about, now how do I want to kind of implement these things given all of the different constraints? So the first one, in terms of keeping my kids healthy, I'd be implementing that by social distancing and hand washing. My husband is a first responder, so he's still working out in the field. He's a police officer, so we have a little bit higher risk, and so we've got to do a bunch of extra things. And so I've got to protect my kids in certain different ways, right? But like, we're trying to keep things controlled in certain ways, okay? Number 2, there's not much to do there because, you know, we're just keeping things controlled. Number 2, this one's a little bit more complicated. Keep my children feeling psychologically safe, low anxiety, and in good spirits. Okay, how do I try to implement that? One, structuring home time, because I think that actually contributes to their sense of safety. I think that having, again, like I said before, I think keeping things really structured makes them feel really safe. I think it makes them feel like, okay, this is a new kind of normal. This is a new routine. They're settling into it. It's like, this is what we do during this time. Exercising because it reduces their stress. Limiting their exposure to news because this might create anxiety. Talking about it when I'm feeling stressed, because I think that when they sense that I'm stressed and I'm not talking about it, which I am stressed, I mean, this is a stressful time, I think that's actually far worse than them just like feeling I'm stressed and me not talking about it. Telling them the truth about what's happening in the world when they ask questions, like, when are we going to go back to school? Or why are people so scared? Or, who do I know that's sick or whatever? Although giving them like a kid sanitized version of the truth and only telling them when they ask, or when I think it's really important that they know something. So if I think they're going to engage in a behavior that's not safe, for instance, because that goes back to value number 1, right? If one of my kids did do this, they were not like obeying the rules of social distancing, they were getting too close to someone else, and then I had to tell them, this is why you need to do this, because it's not safe. But that rule kind of butts into rule number 2, because I don't want to raise their anxiety, so I have to do it in a way that's kind of delicate. Okay, so that helps them trust me and feel safe with me. And then I'm spending a lot of time thinking of fun things we can do together so that we can try to make this time feel different and maybe feel fun in different ways. Okay, value number 3 is then helping my children try to kind of do new things and grow and still develop in certain ways that are important for them in other ways, while also trying not to be so perfectionistic. So yeah, that means doing the homeschooling. It means a lot of like education online. It means Zoom meetings. It means trying to work with my internet to make it feel better. It means trying to have play dates online. And it means not getting to every requirement a teacher sets. That's for me, right? Now, I just walked you through that just so you could have kind of an example of like, how would you do this? But I want to go back to the question that was asked. So how do we do this with screen time? Well, my question back to you would be, how does this fit with your parenting values? And then I would also say that typically the reason why people say screen time is bad is because of what kids do on screens. Because mostly what kids do with screens is they passively receive information. They sit there, they numb out, they take things in, but they're not engaging in any kind of intelligent way. And that's actually not what they're doing when they're in school. The stuff that happens over school usually is pretty active, it's pretty involved, typically. I don't know because I'm not watching your kids, so I'm not sure what they're doing, but I would guess that it's not passive receiving of information. On the other hand, maybe this kind of violates your parenting value. Maybe that parenting value is really important to you right now, and I'm not sure how that fits with your parenting value. I think it's okay to set your own parenting priorities, and it's okay to set rules for this time of life that might be different than what happens at a different time in life. But I also think it's okay to say no to school things that don't fit with your parenting values. I think it's okay to do education your own way right now if you don't want to do it that way. So I don't know if that's an answer that helps or not, but that would be my answer to you. Okay.
I think that was hugely helpful, and I've heard that question asked in a variety of different ways. So having walked us all through that, I think that's a beautiful framework. I appreciate that. How do I impose discipline while recognizing that so much has already been taken away from my children? I don't want to be overly permissive, but I don't want my children to feel like they live with a tyrant, me.
Yeah, so this is also a great question. I want to know who all these people are because I like them a lot already. This is a really good question because I think that this parent, whoever asked this question, really cares about their children and feels really empathizes a lot with what their kids are going through and is taking on a lot of responsibility for the loss of what their kids are feeling. And that makes me really like that person. My answer to that question would be the following. And that would be like, I think I kind of go back to the answer from before, which is that I do think having priorities in terms of having like, I think that kind of going through this mental exercise of coming up with a parenting value kind of framework would be helpful, just even mentally to think about. And I would do this if you have a co-parent, a partner who co-parents with you. I would do this with your co-parent so that you're on the same page about this. But I think that having some grounding principles that you have about what are our most important goals for our kids right now, what are our most important values is really important, because it may not be that they're the same values that operate during everyday life, but some of them will probably be the same. So, and I still think discipline is really important, regardless of what other things your kids have lost and regardless of what else your kids are going through. And I also think it's actually really important psychologically for your kids. So even though your kids have lost a lot, and maybe actually because your kids have lost a lot, it's a really important part about life being predictable for kids. So limits make kids feel really safe. It makes them feel that their world is predictable. It makes them feel that their parents are in charge of things. And that's part of kids feeling like the world is an orderly, safe place where things make sense. And that's what they need to feel right now, actually. Because a lot of things don't make sense right now. A lot of rules have changed in their lives, and that creates a lot of anxiety in kids. And so actually a lot of what you could do for your kids is have very consistent rules and limits about certain things that are not okay. For example, being unkind to your siblings is probably still not okay. Hitting your siblings, for example, is not okay. Taking things from your siblings is not okay. That kind of thing. I think that discipline for those kinds of behaviors would be not only okay to do as a parent, it would be recommended to do as a parent. So I think it's actually my message would be that it's scarier and worse for kids if parents can't or won't set limits for them.
Great. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Am I muted? No. That's wonderful. I think that provided a tremendous framework. And I'll just take a minute to say, I didn't say what I didn't say in the beginning, and that is we are recording these, and they are available on our YouTube channel. So all the parents who are busy right now with kids may want to check in later. Yeah. So we'll have that for you. Cindy, I still have a lot of questions for you on the nature of the virus, as well as medical treatment and immune response. So if you are okay, I will slog on ahead.
Sure, but let me just first say that I so much appreciate hearing from Jessie, because we've recognized that in addition to the actual pandemic of the virus, which is a physical disease, illness, there's also a mental component to it, the psychological impact. And so I feel that paying attention to our mental health as well as our physical health, they have to go hand in hand. So thank you so much for that. It was really helpful. And I know that especially for parents with school age or younger children, it's a very confusing time. So that was great advice. It's terrific. Thank you.
Thanks, Cindy. Yeah, you're welcome.
Yeah.
Absolutely agreed. Thank you.